All right, guys. So it's been a crazy couple days. So I brought out the 386 again, tried to boot it up and mess with it the other night, and realized that it wasn't working. It wasn't detecting the hard drive. And I knew it worked before because I booted into DOS, kind of messed around, kind of dug around to see, maybe what this thing was before. Dug around a little bit, but shut it down and took it apart, like I do, because I can't leave things well enough alone, even if they're working. So trying to diagnose and at least prep for a video that I'd kind of figured out what the problem might have been, involved 3.5 hours of just beating my head against the wall. I've actually got all that written down so I don't forget anything because so much happened. So, like I said, it wasn't detecting the drive. I got in there, tried to do, all the physical checks, make sure all the connections were good. I knew it was getting power because it would power on and the drive would click, it doing like a little self-test and everything. So I knew that it was getting power, but the hard drive light wasn't working, and it never even attempted to try and read from that hard drive. So my first thought was, okay, maybe a cable's not plugged in right because the cable routing in it is terrible. But checked all that, checked out fine. Was kind of hoping that it wasn't a drive controller. But I realized that when I was taking it apart the first time, the BIOS clock battery is built into the chip. It's a all-in-one chip. It's a Dallas clock chip. And I've actually got some experience with them for my Windows 95 computer. But this one, I wanted to see if it was socketed on there so I wouldn't have to desolder it to replace it with a more modern version of it that somebody makes with a replaceable battery instead of having to replace the whole chip. Makes life so much easier. So I realized that I took it out and, well, the BIOS forgot everything. It forgot, obviously the date and the time and the normal stuff, but it also forgot what kind of drive that it would have. So instead of being like a modern PC where on the first boot up, you can just hit delete, pull up the BIOS, tell it, well, whatever, and you're good to go. Well, a lot of these older computers have a special program that you run that you've got to have the disk for. Well, I didn't have that disk. I thought I did, because I've got this whole booklet that I thought was for a 386, and in the back there is actually a diagnostic disc for the Compaq 386. So I put it in there, doesn't work. Think, all right, well, crap, maybe this disc is dead, because it's just been sitting in this notebook for God only knows how many years. I mean, this thing's still sealed, so it's probably original. Hasn't been touched in 30 years plus. So, okay, go online, dig up another image file and realize that that image is 720K. That disk is 1.44 meg. If you didn't know, floppy disks come in different densities, essentially. There's double density, which is 720K, or high density, which is 1.44. Well, I realized that after trying out a couple disks in this 386 only has a 720K floppy drive. So nothing I've got is a 720K floppy. So I go in, I Google, how to make a 720K floppy. It looks pretty simple. Try it on my USB drive that's connected to my Windows computer. Doesn't work. That's apparently a normal thing. A lot of the new drives won't format a 720K floppy. So I dig out my Windows 95 PC, figure, okay, well, this should be able to do it, right? Tape over it, try it in DOS, and it won't format in DOS for whatever reason. Just says drive's not ready. So reboot, try it in Windows, and for whatever reason, it'll work in Windows. Awesome. So get it formatted. But one of the things that I was troubleshooting while I was trying to format it into DOS was, okay, maybe I didn't tape up the hole well enough on the side, because you've got to tape up the hole that's on the left side of the floppy to tell the drive that it's a 720K floppy. So I put 2 pieces of tape on there thinking that was the problem. It wasn't, but that'll be important later. So finally get it formatted, and I found a image writing program online for Windows 95. Blows me away that it's still hosted out there. Try and copy it to the SD card that I've got my Windows installed on, because I've got an SD card reader on my Windows 95 computer. And it just basically, it connects to the IDE cable and it pretends it's a hard drive. It's really, really, really useful. It's great. Makes life so much easier because I can swap out SD cards. I can write files to it very easily, which is what I wanted in this case. So plug it into my computer, try and write the files, boot it up, realize the files aren't there. So what the heck? Try it again, and it's just not writing to that SD card. So finally figure out that the card's corrupt. I can't write to it. It'll read from it, but it won't write to it. So awesome. So I copy everything over to a floppy drive. Thankfully, the image and the program are really, really small. So I copy them to a floppy drive, copy them over to the mechanical drive in that computer, install it, and it installs fine. Awesome. So I just picked one of the disks. Looking back, I really should have just started with a diagnostic disk, although I'm kind of glad I didn't because I needed the proof of concept here. But I picked I had one for DOS Disk 1 for the Compaq, specifically for the Compaq. So installed or tried to write that, pull it up in the program, and no compatible drives connected. I'm like, are you serious? The floppy drive's right there. Look at it, right there. But yelling at it didn't work. So I then went ahead, tried to think, okay, what if I go into the BIOS and trick it and tell it that, no, this drive's actually a 720K drive, not a 1.44 meg drive. So go into BIOS, tell it that. On the first boot up, it said floppy disk error 40. So I was like, oh, you know, I'm just going to try it anyway. Why not? At this point, what else can go wrong? So, all right, did that. It actually boots up and it actually worked. It would read and write to the disk and the program wrote to it fine. So, okay, thank you. Something finally worked the way it was supposed to. So write that image, put it into 386 and wouldn't boot, wouldn't read it. Just said, please insert a bootable disk. So try and eject that disk and realize it's stuck because I had 2 layers of fairly thick, unfortunately, duct tape. It's the only tape I had lying around. And it gets stuck because the eject mechanism in this 3.5-inch floppy drive is terrible. It's not got a lot of travel, and the button only ejects it like maybe 1/4 of an inch. There's nothing there. It's awful. So I've now got a disk stuck in there. So I think, well, okay, maybe it's just not aligned right. So I kind of poke it and jiggle the disk in there around, and lo and behold, it actually worked. It read the disk. No, it didn't boot into DOS like I thought it would, because this is Compaq DOS, and it's a specific, uses a specific program, and that program apparently requires a fixed disk, so a hard drive. Well, this wasn't seeing the hard drive, so it wouldn't boot up. But I've got proof of concept, so I know it works. So thank you. We've finally got something here. So copy what I thought was the diagnostic disk over, the image file over, write that, put it back in there, and every time I swap, I've got to copy it over. I've got to go to the BIOS, tell it it's a 1.44 megabyte floppy, copy the stuff over, reboot, tell it that it's a 720K floppy again to write the image file. So every time I do that, it's a reboot, and it is frustrating. But write the image for the diagnostic disk, plug it in there, crossing my fingers. Okay, maybe finally. So I figured, you know, I'd figured out by this point the diagnostic disk was what I needed to fix this. At least I'm hoping. I haven't actually tested it yet. This was just me trying to set up for a video. By this point, this is like hour 2. And I'm really annoyed at myself for not filming all of this at this point. That's why I'm doing this video now, because, well, I didn't record anything and I wanted to share my pain. So I put the disk in there, try and boot it up. Nothing. All I get is a load failure, which is really helpful. Thanks. So I try and jiggle the disk around, maybe thinking, okay, the head is off just slightly. Maybe it's not aligned right or something. Because I did write it on a high density drive, and those sometimes will mess up the alignment of where the head goes for a double density drive to read. Nope, that wasn't it. Really plug it back in, boot up the Windows 95 box, plug it back in, look at the actual files on the disk, because I didn't do that. Really should have. Learning a lot through all of this, and realize there's nothing that's bootable on there. It's just some programs. I don't know why it's not bootable. You'd think a diagnostic disk would be bootable, but it's not. It's just got some programs on it. So, okay, well, I figured that out. I Google and try and find another one. It's got a couple other files on there. I copy that over thinking maybe, that'll make it bootable. It didn't. So I pull out old reliable DOS 3.3 on a 5 1/4 inch floppy. This thing has come in very useful with these old computers I got from Computer Reset, because it will boot on pretty much anything, and it just works. So this has come in very, very valuable to me. So plug that in, plug it into plug in the 5 1/4 inch floppy, and it won't boot off of it. And I'm like, well, what the heck? I know it'll boot off of this. So go ahead and realize that the only drive it's trying to boot from is the 3 1/4 inch drive, or 3.5 inch drive, not the 5 1/4 inch drive. So swap the drives, because it's a physical connector. It's got the twist in the cable, and that's what physically tells the computer which is the A drive and which is the B drive. So do that, finally boots into DOS. Hooray, yet more progress. This is hour 3 by this point. And so I try and move to the B drive. It'll, try and read, it'll read, but it'll immediately go back to the A drive and DOS for some reason. I don't know if this is a quirk with DOS 3.3 and I'm just not used to it, because I'm used to using DOS 6.22. But it won't actually change to the other floppy, and I can't run a directory command to show all the files on it. It won't work. So eventually I'm beating my head against the wall, but I finally decide, well, what if I just try and run it directly? So b:/setup. And it worked. It loaded up the setup program and went in there and set the time. It asked for what kind of drive was connected, and I didn't have the drive type at the time. And I wanted to film all of this anyway, so I didn't do it. I just needed to get the freaking program to be able to load. And it took me 3.5 hours from trying to figure out what the problem was to writing a single floppy disk. So eventually, if you beat your head against a wall hard enough, you'll eventually make a hole, and hopefully it's progress. So I didn't plan on doing this video, and I know it's longer than most people are going to watch, but I had to share my pain. I'm going to post the actual video of me running the program trying to fix the problem on Friday. But I'm going to go ahead and post this one as soon as I get it edited. And yeah, so film everything, because this would have actually made for a fairly interesting video, all the troubleshooting I went through. And B, just think outside the box, because eventually it'll work. But yeah, it was a bad night last night. But I've made progress, so I'm going to go ahead and end the video here, guys. And, all the usual YouTube stuff, like, subscribe, bell, do whatever you want. I mostly post these videos for myself and to share. So I appreciate, anything. But yeah, y'all have a great night.